welcome to all of you around the world watching online. I'm Shane Slater, Programming Director for the Hairouna Film Festival. This is the post-screening Q&A for this classic Black British film, Pressure, from 1976. And tonight we have a special guest, Fiona Compton. She will be speaking on some of the historical context of what you just saw. She's a real ambassador for Caribbean culture and history. So Fiona, tell us a bit about yourself for those who aren't familiar with you and your work.
Cool. First and foremost, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for what you all are doing. Just know that your work is very important. And it's so wonderful to see like such a wealth of Caribbean film and the intention that you guys are putting forth. So thank you all. So I'm Fiona. I am the founder of New Caribbean. I started it in 2017. I think probably for the same reason that you all started the film festival, is I felt like our stories needed to be told in different and dynamic ways, and we just needed to dig a little bit further to find our stories and for them to be highlighted. And I think it really has shown me that it's not that people don't care about history, it's how the stories are told. And I think as Caribbean creators, we're starting to diversify how we tell our stories. And it's not everyone learns in the same way. So that's what Know Your Caribbean is. So I have my hands in lots of different pots. I don't like to say I make films, but I shoot stuff and I edit it. It's something, right? But I'm not comfortable in calling myself a filmmaker, but I dabble in certain elements of film, but primarily I'm a historian. I was a photographer for a very long time, and then I've migrated into Know Your Caribbean and running it full time. And that has really been my passion. So that's a bit about me.
And you're an actress. We saw you earlier tonight in Sorrow's Kitchen. For those who were in that screening, Fiona was a guest star in that film.
Very small role. Very small. It was my first acting gig, I'll say, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go right into it. So what I wanted to do for the first question was to lay the foundation for the Windrush. What do we mean when we say the Windrush generation? This film is specifically speaking about the Windrush generation and their descendants. But when we say the Windrush generation, what does that mean?
Okay, so I didn't know too much about the Windrush generation properly until the whole scandal happened in 2018. So what happened was after World War II ended in the 1940s, Britain was just mashed up. Right? They're financially, their structures, they get bombed up, everything was smashed up and they needed help. So they basically did this call out to people in the Caribbean to say, oh, your mother country needs you, because we were still part of, the British colonies. We were still part of Britain technically before independence. So this is Jamaica's independence was in the 1960s, St. Lucia, St. Vincent's in 1979. So all of this time, 20, 30 years before, we were still very much British. So the passports and the travel, you were under Britain. So they did this call out. And I think the estimate is between 1948 and 1980s, I think 500,000 Caribbean people came across to Britain as part of this Windrush call out. So they came in different waves, right? So a lot of the people who came across, and I had done an interview actually with Dennis Bovell, who's an amazing Bajan musician who's done so much stuff. If you just Google Dennis Bovell, you see he has done so much. And he had said this, he said he didn't migrate to the UK, he relocated because Barbados was very much a part of the UK at the time. So he didn't see himself as an immigrant or a migrant. He just relocated to another part of, the wider British Empire. So a lot of the children that came across, if some of y'all may remember, y'all be traveling on your parents' passports, because young children did not have their own passports. So a lot of these children came on their parents' passports. So some kids were babies, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, whatever, or they travel on their siblings' passport. So when their parents passed away, they didn't have any so-called papers or immigration papers. They were just here, living here. They never went back home because they came here as children. So like England was their home. They considered themselves British. And then Theresa May, who was the prime minister, a few years ago, she did this whole Hostile Immigration Act. And they're like, oh, but y'all don't have no papers because you came on your parents' passport. How do we really know that you're actually legit? So they decided to deport all of these Caribbean people back to the Caribbean, but they grew up in Britain. That's all they know. They are British. They saw themselves as British. They've worked, they paid their taxes. There was never any question. And then this whole thing under Theresa May. And then one of the issues is that in 1971, there was this whole thing about reprocessing, whatever. And the Home Office, which is basically the hub of British immigration, they had destroyed lots of the paperwork. So they said they didn't have the paperwork. So they didn't do their due diligence in terms of record keeping. So like, we don't have records. And then one of the things they decided to do, they decided to ask of all of these like ridiculous requests to kind of validate your stay. So they were asking, you know, some of these people who have been here 50, 60 years to show like evidence of them being in the UK for the past 50 years. So they want like doctor's letters for every single year. So say you came here in like 1965. So 1965 to now, you had to show your doctor's letters, your work or school for every single year. So it was like, how can you expect? And so if you could not provide that kind of paper, we'll be like, well, yeah, we can't approve. You can't approve your, you know, the validity of you being here. So a lot of people were deported. So the Windrush generation, of course, this was the scandal that happened in 2018. It was a whole big thing. And then it led to the, one of the heads of the Home Office having to step down. There was a whole kind of thing. And, you know, under Theresa May's Hostile Immigration Act, even I felt the repercussions of that. So I'll tell you one night. So during this time of the hostile immigration period, there'll be these vans, these police vans, which is like all blacked out. And they have a big like back, right? And it's like, it would say something, are you illegal in the UK? You could be liable for some. And there was one night I was at home sleeping hard. This is about 5 years ago. So whilst during the hostile immigration, and I was sleeping and my son was sleeping in the bed with me because my son was about like 5 at that time. And then like this whole set of police just banged through my door, knocked down my door. They're like, hey, we need to see your papers. We need to see your papers. And I'm like, wait, what? So I was just like, wow. And then I said, who are you looking for? And they said they didn't want to say. So we can't tell you, but you need to, does anyone else live here? And when I showed them my papers and stuff. And then all of a sudden they started all nice to me and stuff. But it was very, very scary to have to just wake up 4 o'clock in the morning and have your bed surrounded by 6 police in full gear. And that was the levels of the Hostile Immigration Act. So a lot of Caribbean people, and these are people who are now like pensioners, people who have kids, grandkids, have lived their entire life in the UK and were forced to uproot themselves and go back to, they say that's your home, that's your country, but they didn't know it. They came as kids. So that's the story of the Windrush scandal. But of course, the Windrush generation is way more than a scandal, right? So they contributed so much in terms of transport, in terms of nursing. The Caribbean experienced a huge brain drain because a lot of trained people came across because they wanted people to help in the hospitals in terms of care. So Caribbean people really did support the medical system here in the UK. They supported the transport system. So many of them, even before World War I, they were serving in before World War II, they were serving in World War I. You know, their presence has been in the UK for a long time and their contribution is huge. You know, and one of the things that everyone knows about is Notting Hill Carnival, which is like the 2nd largest street festival in the world. And then it's just been like contribution after contribution after contribution. So the whole scandal was like a massive disrespect And it was also, seen as extremely racist because its people of color were very much targeted, and completely ignored the fact that we were part of Britain at the time in which that we came over. So that's a bit of about the Windrush generation.
Yeah. So in the film, one of the central conflicts is this tension between these people who came over in the Windrush generation and those who were born in the UK. And some of the older ones were saying, no, you need to be agreeable, you need to respect the white man's laws, while there's this larger Black Power movement that's happening, and some of the younger people are becoming very involved in that, and there's this movement for Black consciousness. Tell us a bit more about what was happening at the time.
So in terms of what was going on at that time, is we have to think about the era that a lot of these people came from at the time. That era grew up of singing God Save the Queen, that England is your mother country. You have a certain respect for the royal family. It was very much pro-British. And, we can still talk to some of the older generation and they still have that kind of mindset, like when the royal visits happened, they wasn't protesting like how they are now. It was like a big deal. Yeah. And you never question that. So they came across, I think, this kind of what I call it colonial aspirations, where you aspire to move to big country, to get better things, in terms of success is defined by your proximity to whiteness. And I think one of the powerful parts of that film was the dialogue between the son and the parents after the police had raided the house. And that was a very, very powerful scene because the mother had said, oh, you need to follow the white man and they know best and all of these kind of things. And we very much still think that way. And, these are the repercussions of colonialism. So these children who were either born in the UK or came as young children did not have that same kind of mindset, because I think maybe because they grew up there, so they did not aspire to be part of it because they were born there or they came as young kids, right? But the older generation of their parents, they grew up in the Caribbean, and then you aspire to be British, or you aspire to come to big country and move forward, and you're learning more, and like the white people know best and everything. So that's why they started to have those kind of arguments and so on, where they would kind of be like, but mom, how are you not seeing like these people are horrible and they don't respect us and they are racist? And then she was very insistent on, it's like she just associated being close to whiteness is being closer to success, or being success, equated whiteness with success. So when these younger generations started to not feel like these things, that doesn't mean that, because I kind of relate, because growing up in St. Lucia, I don't know how, but everybody used to go by a beach on a Sunday in Lime, right? And by some of the beaches, they'd have hotels. And I remember myself being maybe 6 or 7. And when the tourists would walk past, I would change my behavior. I would just try and act, if it's more performative, or act I modified my behavior, even me. So I even from a very young age, I started to believe that whiteness was more an elevation or something. I needed to change myself. And I mean, this is me growing up in the 80s in the Caribbean. So I associate with that same kind of feeling. So then these children who've grown up around, and it's when I moved to the UK, I started to see ghetto white people. And I'm like, wait, so white people must be poor for real? So that's when I started to change myself, right? So these children who've grown up seeing ghetto white people, seeing that they're not more educated or any better, they did not feel that same kind of emotion. So this is how, in terms of the Black Power movements, the Black Panther movements that are happening in the 60s and 70s, and it's Britain, because they had this so-called influx of Black people coming to Black and brown people, because we also had people of Indian descent and so on, and mixed heritage coming. So it's Black and brown people coming from the Caribbean became very visible here, and it started to become very uncomfortable because those who served in World War I and World War II, you serve, okay, go bye. Later, it's like, come out. And you find a lot of veterans who served in World War I and World War II said that it's like they were happy for you to serve, but as soon as you're done, you had to leave, right? But so there was a lot of race riots, a lot of racism that was happening. And a lot of the older generations like, just keep your head down and don't make trouble. But the children growing up who are not like mystified by whiteness were like, no, hell no, we're not going to take that. And so that is why there was a lot of, this kind of fractures between the parents and the children, just like in that scene that was like extremely powerful. And I think what was also very powerful is that the father at the end, who felt the same way, but he couldn't say so to the son. I thought that was like one of like the most powerful scenes in the film.
Yeah, and you're talking about that police raid, and today there's so much attention on police brutality and so on, and this is going back decades, right? And you see that in the film, and we talk about Babylon, and tell us more about how the police force in the UK was used as a tool of oppression and instilling fear in the Black people, the Black population.
Well, I think it's just like in the US and stuff, but Britain has a funny way. They don't shoot you and that kind of thing. There's not so many police shootings and stuff. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because we had the riots in 2011. That was because like London was like set afire, like all kinds of buildings and things. It was massive. And that's because the police had killed a Black man in his car. So it's not to say it doesn't exist, but over the years, British racism is I call it very exquisite. So, like when you watch films and they always have the British characters are always the well-spoken scientist or the well-spoken villain, or they're always like well-spoken and eloquent. And that's what their racism is like. So it's not as, they're not going to necessarily like come into your house and shoot you down like how they have done in the States, especially with both Jean and all of those things. But what they will do is terrorize you in many other ways. In terms of housing, in terms of they will raid and mash up, like what happened with Mangrove, the restaurant Mangrove, which was covered in small axe and stuff like that, Steve McQueen's small axe. In terms of they will raid, they will mash up your thing. They will just do things to intimidate you, to make you feel small. And that is what British racism is, right? It's not like they come out and call you the N-word, like in America. And that's what makes it even more difficult about the UK. At least in America, you can pinpoint, say, me, I'm not going Alabama, I'm not going Mississippi, all of these sundown towns, I'm not going. But Britain makes you doubt yourself. That's what the issue about British racism is. Like they do things, so they'd say, oh, you had drugs, so we're doing a raid, we're gonna search your house and mash it up. But they will not necessarily shoot you, right? So that's what they do. They corner you and they make you doubt yourself, but they also terrorize you in ways that say, oh, this is the housing that we've given you this house. This is the housing for you. And we think that your community should stay there together because, you want to be around your people, but not realizing that, okay, we're giving you like the worst of the worst housing, and then we can discuss it later about in terms of the education and the schools, but the police were extremely, extremely violent, also mentally, not physically. And I think we always take violence as something very literal. Like it's only they had to just beat you or kill you. No. British racism and the police is also a lot of mental and emotional abuse as well.
Yeah, I want to touch on that education topic next because it's mentioned in the film, this practice of sending West Indian children into educationally subnormal schools. And it reminded me, Steve McQueen did a series of documentaries. One was Subnormal, and it was really eye-opening to me because I had no clue about it, where they would put these West Indian children who could have otherwise been fine in a regular school for very petty reasons, for calling something a different name than what a British person would call it. So tell us a bit about this whole practice of putting these kids in subnormal schools and basically setting them up for failure.
So they started this whole program called the Schools for the Educationally Subnormal, but they call them special schools. That's a British way, right? That's a British way. They say it nice, but your child, we think they should go to a special school. And that's as you saw in Steve McQueen's thing that's what they had said to the mom of the little boy, your son is going to a special school. And it was basically putting West Indian children into this because their accents were different, not because they were educationally deficient or they were behind. As we know, so many of us have migrated to England, Canada, America, and then they put you in a class, and most of the times we're ahead because the Caribbean education is really good in many aspects, but it's because of the accents. And even a discussion I was having on Know Your Caribbean, a lot of people was even in Canada and in the States were put into English class, or they were held back. So it's not even just in the UK, but in other places as well, they had different versions of this discrimination. But what they did is they put these children in these special schools, which was for the educationally subnormal. And this, really held back because there was very little funding. They were just very dismissive. They just said, oh, all these Caribbean children, they dumb, they don't know nothing. And many of them had come with their school reports. They had excelled in the Caribbean, and they were being put in these schools where there was just very little support. So that's one of the other things that adds to on top of how Britain's racism is very rife, but then it, like I say, they say things in a certain way to make you doubt yourself, because they say, no, we're putting them in a special school to help to assimilate them to the British culture. They say like all of this nice fancy language, when it is actually the root of it is discrimination because of where you come from and your skin tone. So that is, and it was happening for a long time. A lot of parents didn't know until they started to have, this kind of movement of informing parents and going actually door to door with these booklets to let West Indian parents know what was going on. So that was another layer of the things that they were doing in Britain. So like I was saying, it's not just, oh, but they wasn't killing us or whatever. Nobody was doing a whole bunch of other things to kind of keep us marginalized and in a corner,
Yeah, that mental slavery.
Exactly that.
Right. So the next thing I want to touch on is, Christianity is always a touchy subject for Caribbean people. And there's a scene in this film where the preacher is talking about pride and you must be humble. And there's a line where he says, you need to drive those black thoughts from your hearts and replace them with good white thoughts. And it brought me back to, when you think about the civil rights movement in the US, you often think of the church as being a strong rallying point, and even Martin Luther King was a preacher. So when I was watching the film, I was wondering if there was a different dynamic with the church, with the Black church in the UK. Do you know anything about how the church was involved with the Black Power movement, civil rights, and so on?
I think the church had some involvement, but it wasn't as, you didn't find like preachers in the forefront with Martin Luther King. There were some, but I think it really did. The church, I think, when you look at say like the USA, I think the Black churches was a form of respite and a form of community in Jim Crow and stuff like that. This is where they could congregate and they could sing and they could do a thing, because in the US, they are a minority, right? So the church is where they congregated and they had their time. So I think there was a certain power within Black church, right? But I think in the Caribbean, the dynamic is different. And I think it is like, yes, we have a lot of Afro-Caribbean Christianity, like Shelter Baptists and Revivalists, and there's a whole bunch of different religions, right, that are actually quintessentially very pro-Black and pro-African. But I think in terms of like the Black churches here, they can be very conservative and Eurocentric. And you don't really, a Black church is not really a place you turn to for, not radical is, some people take the word radical in different, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to kind of take some kind of proactive Black action and things like that, you would not go to the church here. Because once again, even though you are, it's not really a place where you'd find, I think it's just extremely conservative in the UK in particular. But then also, you know, the thing is that with Christianity in the Caribbean, we're looking at the Black churches of people who came from the Caribbean and migrated up here. And especially coming from that era, and then looking at how Christianity was a way to pacify us and to make us very docile, and also your proximity to whiteness and white Jesus and so on. There was this kind of thing of, it's like an extension of don't make trouble, keep your head down, be a good Christian. So it wasn't a place of activism. It wasn't like, say, when Martin Luther King was saying about using excerpts from the Bible, talking about, you know, freedom and equality, but doing things so peacefully and things like that. It's not like that in the UK at all. I think I think people forget how conservative Caribbean people are. We are extremely conservative. When you talk about like our homophobia, in terms of just like, you know, like helping the homeless, in terms of we align with a lot of conservative American beliefs. Yeah. Actually, when you break certain things down, like for example, when you look at things like sexual abuse, never question the pastor, you never question, you don't question
abortion and all those hot topic issues.
Exactly.
Conservative side.
Exactly. Abortion, in terms of the pastor siphoning off money, have big car, big ride, big house. No, don't question the pastor. So we are extremely, extremely conservative when it comes to that. And I think one of the things looking at as a historian, I think just to go back a little bit, I found some excerpts about, you know, enslaved or formerly enslaved people and how they used the church as a crutch because they were faced with so much violence. Like the Caribbean had so much violence during slavery and during apprenticeship and post-emancipation. And you found a lot of enslaved people holding on to Christianity because that was the one thing they were given every Sunday. And it became a form of respite. And they had I found an excerpt of a woman from Jamaica. And she was, I think, well into her 80s, but she would walk 11 miles one way and back every Sunday to get to church. And he asked her, why do you do that? And she says, because it's my one place to go and to be. So to me, our like relationship with Christianity is also a reflection of the relationship that we've had with so much violence in our history, because that is the one thing that they allowed us to do. And therefore, and then also manipulate and hold on to it. And they gave us the versions of the Negro Bible for us to be passive. So they took out 80% of the Bible and presented to enslaved people in the Caribbean to follow your master, be good, be passive. And I think all of those mindsets extended into, you know, the generation of those people during that time when everything was popping off in the UK. You know, everything has a root, and I think it comes from that.
Yeah, so I'm going to move to the questions that we've been getting in the chat.
Okay.
So the first, I'm going to kind of combine the first two. It's talking about those who are affected by the Windrush scandal. Mm-hmm. Can you say if there have been any reparations of any kind, and were they provided with any new documents? What's going on with those people now?
Well, I think it varies case to case, but there was a huge support system that was created, especially within the Black community. So a lot of Black lawyers came forward. I think also like a lot of like white lawyers as well, but there were a specific group of Black lawyers who put forward themselves as pro bono, so they didn't charge, and to help a lot of people to have their stay. So a lot of people were sent back reparations. Some of them, when they say, "Oh, we'll give you a little some," it would never be enough to compensate, because a lot of them were put in detention centers, and we're talking about grannies and grandfathers that are put in detention centers and then sent back, and they were sent back with like a lot of people that they knew growing up. The people have long passed away and all of that. So whatever money, if it's 3,000, 5,000, is never any big money. But there was a big rally to fight for their right to stay. So a lot of people, their deportations were overturned and they were able to stay. But a lot of people were sent back and they're still fighting to come back. So it does vary case to case, because they're still going on about like what the documentation and what you can provide and so on. It's like, it's not just enough to say, "Oh, I've been here 40 years. They're still asking for timelines and stuff, but the process has just taken a long time. But some people have been able to stay or have been able to come back.
Yeah. The next question, it's asking, is there a tendency to put too much emphasis on Black versus white? From history, there were tensions and discriminations against poor whites, against the Irish and other non-Black immigrants, and that society, the UK society, has bred a strong notion of class and status beyond race alone. So do you think we are putting too much emphasis on the Black versus white dynamic?
Okay, well, I mean, the thing is, the Irish went through a lot. The Irish did go through a lot through the Cromwell period and everything, and in sending them across the Caribbean for indentureship, and then they had this whole genocide that happened on British soil. But that's not to us talking about our issues and issues of Blackness and race and discrimination is not to negate or invalidate the experiences of, say, the Irish or other, in terms of, yes, Britain has like a horrible class system. That's not to invalidate the experiences of those people. Our experience, we can coexist, it's not to, and, I think that's an important thing for us to understand. I mean, having said that, like especially within the Caribbean, indentured laborers went through, and I had to understand that as well. Indentured laborers had to go through a lot, and there was thousands of Irish and Scottish people who died on Caribbean soil due to the hardships of indentureship. But having said that, they were still classed above Black people. So on the onset of when the indentured laborers came across the Caribbean, they were there, they treated them horribly. Then they started to bring across enslaved Africans, and this therefore elevated the indentured laborers. So even if, say, their privileges and stuff were incremental, it still existed. And there is this ability to be valued more as someone who is white, even if you are of less value of the upper class, British and so on. But I mean, I just think it's not oppression Olympics. We're not fighting about who had it worse. I think it's just about, just because we're talking about our experience, we're not trying to erase yours, because the Irish in them especially went through a lot. And yes, there are poor whites who have gone through a lot, but so have we. And I think it's like, why are we quarreling amongst each other? We're supposed to be looking at the people who are actually doing the oppression. So that's what my feedback would be about that.
The next question, I think it ties in nicely with the experience of the main character and how he's struggling to get a job. So it's saying, many of our parents still think that being born there makes it easier to assimilate. They are blinded to the belief that more education equals more opportunities, and not realizing that race sometimes trumps education and humility. And then there's a second part to the question. Do you find that many foreparents who also remained in the Caribbean pushed the same rhetoric of keeping your head down and have instilled that in some of the younger generation who now face the same struggle.
Yeah, hell yeah, absolutely. I think parents still now do that. Keep your head down, don't make no trouble, don't make no noise, just be thankful for that you are here in England, make the money, and you have to be full of gratitude to be there. You cannot question anything. Definitely. And I do agree that people are visual, so they see your race first. You know, when you look at it in terms of when people send in their CV, and if your name is, Hakeem something, or you know what I'm saying, that in itself, in terms of like how people who have very Black names and stuff, even though most Caribbean names aren't like, say, Black American names, but at the end of the day, if they can discern that you are Black, or if you come in for the interview, it is extremely impactful. And there is a lot of bias. They say it's unconscious bias. I think that's a nice way of saying you've been racist, but whatever. It is very much that. And I think, yes, they do think that, yes, of course, being educated helps, but then it's not the be all and end all. And I think, I think what was really interesting is that sometimes I've seen interviews with the older Windrush generation, and they say, oh, we had a really, a good experience. It was fine. Sometimes they invited us to tea and they were so surprised that I could speak such good English. And then they're seeing that as like a compliment. Oh, wow, you speak really good English. Wow. And then, but then, some of the young people would be like, but don't you see that, like the kind of microaggression or the problem with that, the surprise, oh my God, you can actually speak English, you can actually speak good English, those are the things. And another friend of mine, she had done this huge project for race relations for Houses of Parliament, and she traveled around the UK. And she said a lot of the older generation was saying that they were fine, it was okay, and they had blocked out a lot of the negative experiences. And then their grandkids or their kids would be there, but like, Granny, don't you remember the time when they put the excrement through your post box? And then kind of jog their memory because they had blocked that out. And a lot of our parents and grandparents don't talk about the trauma they've been through. They may drop a little 1 line, 2 line, but I think maybe that's their survival technique, their way of coping, their way of dealing, denial. I don't know. I cannot speak for them. But in terms of that blocking out of those traumatic experiences speaks a lot, because they're not preparing their kids for experiences. They think that education is the answer to kind of erase all of those things, but it's not. And they have been through a lot. And I just wish they'd kind of speak more about it, but maybe that was their way of dealing with the trauma that they went through.
It's really fascinating because in the film you see at the end where the parents are saying, back in Trinidad, we were educated, we had these great professions, and now the best thing we can do in the UK is clean a house. And it's really fascinating to see that while they're pushing this idea that you need to be educated, they're seeing it in their son that he can't get a good job, and they're seeing it in themselves. They're experiencing it themselves, and yet he asks them 20, 30 years later, oh, we had such a good time, and and they treated us nicely, and it's right in their face. And I guess it's a coping mechanism, I guess, for them to really just try and make the best of what was happening. The next question, do you think that there is a bias in the Caribbean towards, I don't know if it's towards or against British Caribbean people?
I think Caribbean people, we can be like, we don't have no breaks, okay? We will make fun of everybody. And of course, if you are like second generation, Caribbean or West Indian, whatever, and you come to what you call home, because what's different about African Americans, they'll say I'm African American and Black. But when you speak to someone who's Black British, you'll say I'm Ghanaian and Jamaican.
Right.
I'm Antiguan and Vincentian or whatever. So they never really say, there is a Black British movement happening, but most people will always say their lineage when they're introducing themselves. So they see those things as part of their home. So when they go, and of course, there's some cultural gaps, or there's certain things that they don't know, or certain nuances that they may not understand. Yeah, Caribbean people will, because we have a culture of ridicule and making fun of not just like British, everybody just gets it, but of course it's gonna hurt, because you're going home like expecting like this open embrace and everyone's like, welcome home. And, you know, people may kind of question are you really Jamaican though? You say you're Antiguan, but I mean, you don't say you never, I don't know, fungi or whatever it is, right? Or you don't know who's burning flames. How you can say he's Antiguan and you don't know burning flames? So those are, I think that's what it is. So it's just that we can be tough. We can be tough. I mean, the thing is, my son, I'm hoping to move my son back to St. Lucia and stuff. And I worry, I say, boy, these people go to, you know, rip this boy, you know, coming in with a good British accent and stuff. But
exactly,
you know, it's just, I think that's just our nature. We have this kind of, it's in the same way. So the person's asking the question, the same way, Caribbean, you walk into a room or you haven't seen somebody for a while, and the first they say, you get fatter, you know, it's like, we just don't have no breaks.
Yeah.
You know, so don't take it too hard. And I think also in the Caribbean, we have very little understanding of the Black British experience as well. I knew before coming to the UK, and I've been here now 20 years, I had like no knowledge of the Black British experience, what, you know, the diaspora has been through, the Windrush police brutality, all the riots, you know, the fire that happened in 1981 when the teenagers died. Like, I knew nothing about the National Front, because we don't hear those things. So we don't have that level of empathy and understanding of that experience. Yeah. And I think it's just important that we have these conversations, so that like the Caribbean people as a whole, we understand the experiences of those people who are in the UK, and that kind of, you know, need to hold on to that identity, and for us to see it as a good thing as well, because a lot of times, you know, people move foreign, they lose their accent, they say they're American, and so we need to see it as a good thing that people want to come back home and want to connect with their heritage. So for us, we need to also see that as a good thing as well, instead of, you know, making fun.
Yeah. So we have one final question from the chat. It's a question that I think is really bigger than what we can discuss right now.
Oh, okay.
But the question is, how do you see the solutions for overcoming these discriminations?
Hey. That's a whole forum, eh? Right? I think everybody has their own versions of answers. And I had a meeting with a friend today from Trinidad, but she's here and she's studying museums. And all of these museums are on this whole decolonizing thing. Decolonize this, decolonize the curriculum, decolonize is the new catchphrase and term everybody using, right? But it's the willingness, she said, like even to decolonize a museum. So for example, the British Museum was founded by Hans Sloane. Hans Sloane was an Irish-English doctor who went to Jamaica to be a doctor for the governor. He was also a doctor for Captain Morgan, who was also governor / pirate / slave owner, whatever. He was there. He used the labor of enslaved people to collect plants and thing and whatever. And he went back to the UK with a whole collection of like thousands of things. And then he married this woman whose father owned a plantation in Jamaica and was making enough money from that. And he used that money to send people off around the world to build up his collection. And, you know, when he was dying, he had like 20,000 artifacts, 2 houses full of things, right? And he's like, yo, England, I want to make a museum. If you pay me 20 grand, I'll give you all my stuff. And this is how the British Museum happened. The British government did a lotto, raised the money, paid his family £20,000, which in the 1700s is big money, right? And now we have the British Museum. How do you decolonize something like that? It has the Rosetta Stone. It has mummies from Egypt. It has statues, big statues from Egypt. It has like a vast collection of things from all around. How do you decolonize something like that? Is the British public really willing to relinquish that? Are you really willing to relinquish all the funds that have been put into the universities from legacies of slave owners? That in itself, and that's just a small element of when we're talking about change, like real change. Yeah. And that's why the question, and it's really hard, because how do you deconstruct these things? And she said, in order for a museum to entirely decolonize themselves, they have to completely deconstruct their entire identity, their centuries or decades and decades of building up themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So how is the willingness to do that, to dig real deep? And I don't think Britain, France, Denmark, all of these places are willing to do that.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I'm currently reading this book called White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And, you know, it's talking about even at the slightest suggestion that a white person is racist, they get very defensive, you're attacking them. And as you said earlier, it's not just the overt violent racism. We have to be able to talk about some of the microaggressions, some of the systemic things that are happening. And it's really not just what we saw back in slavery and back in the civil rights movement. It's still some of these barriers and these ways of thinking that we need to change at the most basic level of just acknowledging racism is the first step. And then you have to start there and see how we can change. It's really a big it's a big task.
It is huge. It's huge. Even like in one of the scenes from the film, when he goes to look for a job and he walks in and it's just all white people, that in itself is like a huge hindrance, because they all we're gonna just hire the best qualified person, but just not feeling welcome in that space. Or you walking into a museum where you can access all this education and it's free, but then you don't see, the only Black people you see there are security guards. They're not the curators, they're not the heads of education. They're, it's those things are very, very telling. And even like in the UK, at least in the Caribbean, we have the privilege of having Black teachers, Black principal, Black doctor, Black everybody, right? Yes, we have loads of issues of colorism, and that's a whole next debate, but at least we have had that privilege. But in the UK, that in itself is a huge barrier, because you are taught by white teachers. 92% of teachers in the UK are white. No, I'm sorry, 86% of teachers are white, but 92% of head teachers or heads of schools are white. So that in itself is very, very telling about who's teaching you, who's shaping you, who's molding you, in terms of discrimination within the schools, because they're saying that young Black boys up to the age of 7 normally are the tops of the classes in the UK. And then when they start passing the little cute stage and they start to get a little attitude or whatever, just like any child would, they're seen as disruptive, they're seen as rude. And some of them, these children have special needs. Maybe they have ADHD, maybe they have autism. My son has autism, but they're therefore demoted or seen as, disruptive or whatever. But, in terms of looking at white children, there's, the special needs, they need this, they need that, or whatever. These are the little things. And if you're saying that the school is going to be 86 to 92% white teachers, that in itself is like a huge barrier. And that's starting from the time the children are like 5, 6, 7. So instantly there is already a setback in that. So, and I think also when you're talking about when you're talking about the variables in terms of discrimination and racism, I had a conversation with this woman, and she was like a head. She was like one of the heads in the school, and she had a mixed race daughter. And I met her, and then she's like, "Oh, your skin is so nice and white. It's so nice and white. It's lovely. Oh, but that hair, oh, you know, like my daughter, she has nice white skin like yours, but you know, her hair is more curly. If I had your hair, oh, I wouldn't know how to deal with it." And she thinks she's complimenting me. Right. You know, she's like, "Oh, it's so full, but I just couldn't handle it. And oh, but your skin is so lovely." And you know, sometimes I see some of the children in my school and their hair is so nappy and so picky. I would never let my daughter. And she's not seeing how problematic that is. And these are the conversations that, because she thinks she's not racist, because she has a Black partner and a mixed race child. Yeah. You know, but not even seeing people who are also engaging in Black people, who are in relationships with Black people. And that is something that's expanding quite a lot in the UK, and not understanding how they too are problematic in how because what she was saying was extremely problematic. And she's one of the heads of a school. So she's referring to Black children as their hair as nappy and as picky and so on. So, but she thinks that she's an ally because she has a Black partner and a mixed race child. So, you know, like back to the you know, the attendee's question, there's just so much. It's just a huge undertaking.
Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm sure we can go for hours talking about these issues.
That's
but
okay.
If you want to engage more with Fiona, you can follow her on Instagram. It's Know Your Caribbean, correct? Mm-hmm. One straight word on Instagram. She has a lot of really engaging, bite-sized posts that she does, and you can learn more about Caribbean history and culture and music and everything. It's a really engaging platform. So thanks again, Fiona. Thank you for everyone who has been following along and tuning in to the festival and our Q&As. And we have another full week left for you to enjoy. And thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a good talk.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.